Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Conversations Over Coffee with me, Rabbi Steve Wernick. Today, I am excited to welcome my guests, Desiree Abeyta and Adi Eshman, to the conversation. I look forward to talking to them about their short film, Anne. But before we get to that, please note that we are on Facebook, YouTube, and bethzedeck.tv. If you like today's conversation, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share with your friends. Comments are always appreciated and help us get the conversation to more people. If you have any questions for our guests, please put them in Facebook or YouTube in the chat, and we'll do our best to bring them into the show. With that out of the way, let me introduce Desiree and Adi. Desiree is a Telly Award-winning actor, filmmaker, and producer, known for exploring social and feminist themes through a magical, hopeful lens. Her debut short film, An Invitation to Tea, was one of the 5 recipients of the Inwood Artworks Filmmaker Grant in 2019 and received 2 Audience Choice Awards, as well as several Excellence in Filmmaking accolades from various festivals. She's been described as a strong visual artist drawn to diverse and engaging storytelling that stems from a fountain of social consciousness. Adi Eshman is a playwright, screenwriter, and producer based in Los Angeles. His plays have been read or workshopped at the Columbia University, New York University Gallatin, Los Angeles Theater Center, the New Ohio Theater, Rattlestick Playwrights Theatre, Cherry Lane Theater, Ophelia Theater, The Shelter, the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, Theater New York City, and The Tank. His short film, Anne, actually their short film, Anne, just had its Canadian premiere at the Toronto Jewish Film Festival. He's a member of EST/LA New West. He's a rising third year at USC's School of Dramatic Arts, earning an MFA in dramatic writing with his BA from NYU Gallatin class of 15. I always say when it comes to introductions and bios that you want to write bios that make your mothers proud. Please welcome my guests, Desiree and Adi, to the show today. So are your mothers proud?
I think so. I think definitely.
I want to add, Adi, I know that in your resume, there's also bar mitzvah tutor.
Yes.
This was it as well. So.
Which relates to, where, some of the inspiration for Anne came from, actually.
So let's start off with a clip of Anne, and let me say that if you missed it at its debut at the Toronto Jewish International Film Festival, you can see it tomorrow as part of the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and we'll put the link for that film festival in the chat as part of the show so that people can watch that. But let's start with the clip. What is it that we're going to see here?
Desiree?
So this is about a little bit over a minute. I would say this piece, basically we have 2 characters, Lauren and Mia. They are both up for the role of Anne Frank in what we imagine to be a fairly high profile production in New York. And I would say this is the crux of the argument and the debate of the piece, when we have one character questioning the legitimacy of the other character playing the role.
So let's roll the film and then we'll come back and discuss.
Okay.
I just don't know how I feel about you trying out for this play.
Excuse me?
I worshipped Anne Frank. My grandmother was a survivor, and now, as a Jewish American, I feel like it's my responsibility to bring Anne's story to this stage.
Well, when I first read her diaries, she spoke to my soul. Her ideas had a huge impact on me.
But she's more than an idea. She was a real girl. She was a real Jewish little girl.
Anne Frank was a little Jewish girl, but her diary has some universal themes, like that little girls can see the best in humanity.
Okay, but...
Like that little girls shouldn't be ashamed of who they are.
I hear you, but...
Like that little girls shouldn't be subject to the cruelty of the state.
I know.
Anyone can portray an idea. That's all I'm trying to say.
I don't mean to pry, But are you Jewish?
There are many Black Jewish communities all over the world.
I know, but are you one of them?
Would that make you feel better if I were Jewish?
It matters to the story.
Millie Perkins wasn't Jewish. She played Anne Frank in the movie adaptation from 1959. Do you only audition for Jewish roles?
I'm just saying certain roles should be played by certain people. And let's be clear, we're talking about a little girl in Amsterdam in the 1940s.
Oh, so I can't play Anne Frank because I'm not white.
Whew, you know, watching it again, it's really, first of all, kol kavod. I personally think this is a very well done film, and as a Jewish educator, it really it calls out for dialogue and conversation. What led you to this topic and to this film?
Yeah, for me, the starting point was a theater festival in New York in 2017, and I was thinking about different ideas. And Hamilton, the musical, was becoming pretty popular in New York. And one thing I was thinking about was this idea around, what does it look like to cast historical figures as people of color? For instance, George Washington in Hamilton, or Hamilton in Hamilton. And I'm also a Jewish educator. I've been teaching at synagogues and as a bar mitzvah tutor for about 11 years now. And something I noticed was that a lot of the female Jewish educators who also acted had portrayed Anne Frank or Margot Frank in productions. So my question became, what would it look like if someone who doesn't typically, present as someone who looks like Anne Frank auditions for that role, in the same way that we're now thinking about auditioning someone who doesn't look like George Washington, auditioning for George Washington. But of course, Anne Frank, comes so much from my personal background and sort of my Jewish experience. And I thought that just felt really exciting and intriguing. And hopefully audiences can engage with those ideas in the same way that I engage with them. And Desiree as well.
Desiree, you want to add anything?
I mean, my involvement started at watching one of the readings. Adi had a reading here, and I knew one of the actresses that was playing one of the roles, one of the actresses that was playing Mia. And my husband and I went, and I was just immediately drawn by the topic and by the debate. I thought that what Adi was tackling was something that people weren't addressing when it comes to the nuance and the delicacy of what it means to expand, and with this, push for diversity, which I think is very much needed in general in our society and in storytelling. This was an area that I felt required more thought, that I didn't think people were including. And I was just really taken by it. So I just went up to him literally right after the show and said, hi, introduced myself, just said, I'm a filmmaker. I'm super blown away by your story, and I would love to work with you on adapting it to a film if you'd be open to that. Because while it is very central to, the Jewish community, I do think that the topics that you're raising is universal. And I'd love to explore that with you. And he said yes.
So when Hamilton, of course, is what comes to mind, and certainly, Adi, what inspired you for this. But I think Mrs. Maisel also comes to mind. Here we have a very popular show about a Jewish comedian played by a Roman Catholic. Do we feel differently about those kinds of roles versus Anne Frank? And what has that come into the discussion that you've had with people as the film's been premiered and the following conversations that have happened afterwards?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Desiree. I mean, for me, the particularity of the role of Anne Frank has already been, played by, at first, non-Jewish white women. For instance, in the clip, they talk about Millie Perkins, who played her in the film adaptation from the 50s.
Which won an Oscar.
Won an Oscar. And now we're actually getting productions, for instance, in LA and in Virginia, where they're casting people of color as in the roles of Anne Frank and in the Frank family. And those productions, in some cases, for instance, the one in Los Angeles, are getting death threats for doing so. So I think this just speaks to the I think the delicacy and the controversy of wading into, you know, this role in this story, even to this day.
Yeah, I also think that, you know, there's two sides to the argument that we're trying to explore here. And there's the very real and very, I think, valid argument about Jewish stories not being owned by Jewish people, and they're kind of being overlooked because of the fact that, you know, to play Jewish doesn't necessarily have to look a certain way, or does have to look a certain way, meaning white. And so, you know, there's a line that Mia says to Lauren where she says, you know, do you only audition for Jewish roles? Well, of course not, because your look allows you the freedom to play other roles. And so I think there is this really very accurate argument where, you know, I know Sarah Silverman talks about it a lot, about, you know, Jewish women, Jewish people not being able to play or have ownership over their own stories. And I think that is a very real aspect of the argument that we're making in this film. And then there's the other side of the argument that is saying, you know, it's not about taking Anne's story and not having it be a Jewish story, but just opening up our idea of what it means to look and be Jewish, and the diversity within the Jewish community itself not being fairly represented. And so I think that is the other side to the coin that we are excited and talk about.
Yeah, so that was, I was going to ask about that. You know, I know that we here at Bethesda in Toronto, we have a committee that we formed 2 years ago, really inspired by a lot of the troubles and challenges of African American communities in the United States, which also, you know, opened up our eyes perhaps a little bit wider as to some of the same racial inequalities that are taking place in Canada, especially vis-a-vis the Indigenous communities. So we formed a racial equity, diversity, inclusion task force, and we're spending a lot of time talking about the broad diversity of Jewish people. That there are Jews that don't appear as white Ashkenazi normative. You know, Sephardic Jews, Jews that are adopting children from Asia and from South America, converts that are coming in all shapes, sizes, and colors and backgrounds, LGBTQ plus, and so forth. And so that was really starking. It was really stark to me in the conversation, you know, when Mia asks if she's Jewish. You know, would it make a difference? Is the issue that she's Jewish or she doesn't appear because of color to be like Anne Frank? And I'm just wondering, you know, what your thoughts are on that, and what has been the reaction of other communities with which you've had these conversations?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that's exactly right, in the sense that Mia asking, you know, basically asking outright, you know, what's the issue here? Is the issue that you don't think I'm Jewish, or is the issue that I just don't look Jewish, you know, or and is it my skin color that is preventing you from, like, if I was just another white girl sitting across from you right now, would you even question whether or not I was Jewish? And what's the real issue here? I mean, I think that's exactly what Mia is asking. And I think that's what we're asking as filmmakers. And I think the reaction overall, you know, I think we had one public screening here in New York City that we did kind of as like a pre-screening before we started our festival run, to just kind of get feedback, to get real live, you know, real-time feedback to this film before we finalized it, you know, and started submitting it. And we had only scheduled like 30 minutes for the talk back. You know, it's a 9-minute film, 10 minutes with credits. And we're thinking, you know, an hour to screen a 9-minute film, and to have like a 30-minute talk back is plenty of time. And the talk back was over an hour and we had to stop it. Like we had to actually call it early. Because we needed to give up the space and we didn't schedule enough time. And I think we were both, you know, I don't want to speak for Adi, but I think that we both were very surprised and excited to see how much people wanted to talk about this. How many people went into the film saying that, you know, just off premise alone, they never would have particularly been open to a person of color playing Anne. And then after watching the film and seeing both girls read for the role, were actually really taken with Mia, and how it brought up the question of authenticity. You know, like what makes someone authentic enough for a role? Is it their DNA, or is it how well they connect to the piece and what their own personal life experience brings to the role? And you know, that's a huge conversation that's happening within the entertainment right now. Like, who has the right to play a role anymore? Who, as actors, what experiences are you allowed to have had in your own life that do or do not make you appropriate for a role, outside of just how you look and DNA and whether or not you fit a role externally. And so I think the conversation has been very surprising, that people, but more so that the surprise has been how much people really want to talk about this and how this film has sparked people being willing to talk about it.
Yeah, and what's also been at another at a reading we did for the play version before the adaptation, there was someone who was a Jew of color who and he was Asian presenting, and he said, you know, seeing Mia read for Anne Frank, he, you know, even though he's not Black, he still felt seen, he felt represented in the film because there's so little representation out there of Jews of color. And so I think that has also been really, really powerful, is hearing or just noticing or hearing, you know, this lack of representation of Jews of color out there, and how they can sort of see themselves in Mia, even though she's not explicitly written as a Jewish character.
I'm going to bring a comment from the audience, which I'm going to turn into a question, because I think it's a good question that is being asked. I'm going to just remind our viewers that if you have a question or a comment, please put them into the chat at either Facebook or YouTube, and we'll bring it into the show. So the question is that part of our reason to tell the story of the Holocaust is so that other people will identify with the plight of the Jewish people as it relates to the Holocaust. Does using people from other communities, does that help or hinder that story?
I think it helps. I mean, I think personally as a filmmaker, I am always looking for the threads and the things that connect us and make us more alike, and show how alike we are, as opposed to how different we are. I don't think that means disrespecting and forgetting, you know, the things that do make our experiences unique and the struggles that we have as people, culturally or otherwise unique. But I'm always looking for the things that help us realize that as a humanity, we are more alike than we are different. And I think Mia's argument and Mia's point of view, as the character of color who still very much so sees herself in Anne Frank, comes from the fact that when we view this as a historical event, it's very easy to detach yourself as a viewer and to say, oh, but that happened so long ago, even though we understand politically that anti-Semitism is still very much so alive today and is very much so an issue. When you're doing Anne Frank specifically and setting it in the 1940s and 30s and setting it in a different country and doing it very historically accurate, I personally think that there is an unintentional disassociation. And there is something to saying, you know, putting someone in the role that shows how it's still very much so alive today, whether it's in different packaging or not, helps people realize that it's still an issue, and that prejudice and any sort of hate towards how someone is perceived is dangerous as a society and can happen at any time.
And yet, I want to just push back a little bit on this. not necessarily because of my own beliefs, but I think that the question needs to be asked. And yet, part of what made the Shoah, the Holocaust, so unique is that it was the industrialized mass murder of the Jewish people.
Yes.
And Anne Frank herself, just seems to be taken out of context every which way you can imagine, as it relates to that story, as well as the Holocaust itself, where the use of Nazi as somehow identifying evil in the world is being so overused that I wonder, as others do we diminish the historical import of the Holocaust, by continuing to allow it to be so taken out of its unique context? And I think that's it's a legitimate question. I wonder how you would respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that we're exploring is not only the history of the Holocaust, but it's also representation about the Holocaust. And, looking at, I mean, I've seen so many films and movies and TV shows about the Holocaust. And at a certain, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience, Rabbi, where you're just saying to yourself, this is not a good representation of the Holocaust. It's too Hollywood, it's too this, it's too that. And so our hope is that, going forward, when we want to portray the history, or we want to discuss the memory of the Holocaust, that we can look at it through, a multiplicity, a multitude of lenses. Because there's certainly bad representations of the Holocaust, and representations that, I feel are either, ignoring some of the history or not respectful of some of the history. And so that was definitely not our intention going into this. Our intention was to, look at, representations and hopefully, create nuance in this conversation that didn't used to exist.
And I would just say, Desiree, before you jump in on that too, I think that you accomplished that in this film. That when I saw this, I didn't think this was a film about the Holocaust, or even Anne Frank for that matter. Right? I thought that this was a film designed to trigger exactly the conversation that we're having now.
Yes.
And the other kinds of conversations. And so if that was your goal, hands down, grand slam, you achieved that, in my opinion. But I'm a rabbi in Toronto. What does that mean?
It matters a lot.
It means a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It means a lot. It was enough for you to want to bring us on to have this conversation. So it means a lot.
Have you created an educational a discussion guide to go with this? Have you reached out to educators, both Jewish and secular, to see if you can market this in a larger audience as an educational piece?
We've had discussions with some people in Toronto about this, and I'm actually speaking later today with someone from the Jewish Education Project. But so far, we haven't sort of put together a package yet.
Well, I know I suggested that you contact the Jewish Education Project for that. So tell them I say hello and that they need to do something. And if you're watching this, you need to do something. Create the discussion guide. It's really worthwhile.
I also brought this coffee mug on purpose. It's a mug of Yiddish proverbs. Okay,
and are any of those proverbs relevant to the discussion today?
Let's see. They're funny, but I don't know if they're relevant.
My coffee mug is a Star Wars coffee mug.
Well, I'm going to out myself, but my coffee is a Starbucks.
It's a Starbucks.
I lose in the mug department today.
What's next for the two of you? Already thinking about another potential collaboration partnership?
I see Yuri posted another question here.
I don't see. That's funny.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
Okay. So Yuri's posting stories of famous actors refusing roles that would take away a role that could be played from somebody else, as well as famous actors taking a role that would take away from somebody else. What are your thoughts on this? Should they just leave it up to the casting directors?
I mean, I think that actors who have a moral high ground about any role that they take is always welcomed. I think that actors, I come from an acting background. I got my degree in theater and musical theater, started out as an actor, and then started transitioning to more behind the camera roles. And I think that there's always a respect there, especially because actors are so hungry and they're scared to pass up roles. I mean, once they're high profile enough to be able to do that, bravo to them. But I think a lot of young actors are just so hungry to work that it's hard to make those decisions. And so if they do and are capable, I applaud it. But I think this adds to the discussion, at least the element of, what makes an actor right for a role anymore. Obviously, I think, the days of who was it? Rooney, playing an Asian in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Like, yeah, absolutely, that should not be happening. But I think that there is a push for colorblind casting, and I heard a term recently that I mentioned previously, that it's that the push to be more about color conscious casting, and really taking into consideration what are the elements that are required for this character to be presented if they are representative of a certain community. I think that still needs to be taken into consideration. And so, yeah, I think if actors personally have an issue and say, this role isn't right for me to take this role, this is clearly supposed to be representative of a different type of person or a different community, then, I applaud them for having the guts to do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Adi.
Yes. Sorry, Desiree, was there something else you wanted to say?
No, I just said I was passing it off to you.
Sorry about that. I guess the only thing I'll add is there's the Pulitzer Prize winning playwright last year, Michael R. Jackson, who wrote A Strange Loop. He talks about how we often get caught up in these conversations around casting people of color in the acting roles. Desiree brings up these discussions around colorblind casting, color conscious, color brave casting, a lot of different words. But what he asked the question, and I think it's worth asking, is, who's in charge of casting the people behind the camera? We spend so much time focusing on who's in front of the camera, who's presenting the story, but we don't spend enough time asking, who's casting the director, who's casting the producers, who's casting the director of photography. And so I think one thing that Des and I try to be really conscious of is who is on set, who's helping us tell our story. And so I think that was really an important question to us, because it's an important question of the film.
I have to give a shout out on this conversation to my friends at the Ruderman Foundation, Shira Ruderman, who's now the head of it. But Shira and Jay are very much involved in disability advocacy and awareness, not just in the Jewish community, but in the larger society as well. And one of the things that they've been working hard towards is not just the issues of race when it comes to casting before and behind the camera, but also people with disabilities. When there's actors that have disabilities that could be playing roles, but those roles end up going to people without disabilities. And so that's another aspect of this. And if people want to find out more about that, you can check out the Ruderman Family Foundation online for that, because they really do great work in advocating for that as well. A lot to discuss here. I want to say to both of you, thank you for being my guest today. Thank you for the film. It was very well done, and a trigger for a very, very important series of conversations that we need to have and that we are having. If you want to see Anne, you can catch it tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, from the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. We put the link for that up on our page already. That's tomorrow at 4 p.m. or you can catch it on the Los Angeles Diversity Film Festival, which is Los Angeles, August 18th to 20th, and we'll put the link for that as well. Thank you both. I look forward to hearing more about Anne, and when you have your next project, shoot me a line. Let me know what it is. I'd be really happy to continue this conversation in any way, shape, or form that we can do it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in Conversations Over Coffee. I'm Reb Steve, coming to you from Beth Tzedec Congregation in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. To find out all the ways in which Beth Tzedec can inspire and enable us as partners to live a meaningful Jewish life, visit us online, www.beth-tzedec.org. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.